Well, hello and welcome. Welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward, and as always, I'm here with my good friend, colleague, and co-host Jim Gurley. And as always, we had a very lively pregame, and we also we put off recording because we weren't in the frame of mind we wanted to be in on Wednesday. So it's now Friday. So that kind of gave us a couple of days to kind of think about a topic that we agreed on, and it became evident that Jim thinking about it for a couple of days and me thinking about it kind of like germinated it a bit. So it might be a little more rich, but it was an interest because I don't think we've ever done that before. But what we came back to is this concept based on some recent experiences, some conversations and meetings that Jim's had, that I've had. It came back to this idea of agency. And Jim has always told me that as he understands what I do in the career development space, professional development space, that I am in fact an agent on behalf of whomever I'm representing. Uh, Probably most people would be familiar with the notion of a sports agent or a musical agent or an entertainment agent, but it's the go-between between the talent, for lack of a better phrase, and the client. And from negotiation to objectivity to messaging to branding and all these conversations, like the idea that someone else could be more objective about you and your strengths and your skills than you yourself could be in negotiating on your behalf. And the as Jim always does, he gave me a definition that he found online. So let me read that, and then Jim, I'll pass it over to you. And we got some pretty good stories. The word agent has several related meanings, but at its core, it refers to something that acts or has the power to act. Here's a breakdown. As a person acting on behalf of another. Number two is this is a common usage, particularly in legal and business context. An agent is someone authorized to represent another person or entity known as the principal. An example, a real estate agent acts on behalf of a homeowner to sell their property. As something that causes an effect, agent can also refer to a force or substance that produces a particular result. Example of that might be the wind is an agent of erosion or a chemical agent. In a general sense, it can mean a person or thing that acts. So, Jim, let's keep rolling off of that pregame.
Yeah. Yeah. Appreciate the definition because the agent, like I said, it can go deep in a lot of different contexts. But what we're going to talk about today is agency in terms of the role of an agent. And you mentioned about AI, and this comes up a lot about how AI is going to change things. It will absolutely change things, but it also is going to make an agent, somebody like yourself that's helping somebody with their career or make a career decision, so much more valuable. Because what AI doesn't have, machines don't have, is they don't have context. They don't have perspective the same way. So it's exciting time. It's a bit overwhelming for a lot of people about how this is all coming together. And then I guess the most common one is consulting agencies, right? That's a huge industry. It will continue to be. The other, when I talk about agents, of course, I have a patent agent. It's done that's an attorney, but his job as an agent is to collect all the information on my behalf and then write the patent. There's different types of that. So there's all we all use agents, and I think the main reason is because agents aren't as close to it as we are as individuals. We're like we were talking, you and I were talking this morning, right? You were talking about a client that you work with, and I was like, Mark, that's unbelievable. I thought you help people get jobs. What you just described was somebody that had multiple opportunities. He came to you to help make a big decision, especially because he was a $300,000 to $500,000 a year guy. That's a big decision. I never thought of that, but you're Rob. So where I'm going with this is that agents are more important probably than ever before. And as me as an innovative agent, I had three requests this week to do either consulting, and one was to speak on behalf of the industry for this topic that I cover. And it was not a bad gig. It's like $750 an hour for 1 hour, and and they'll pay for expenses. So it's not about the money as much as it's the kind of the validation that I did something, obviously, to be worth being paid that for a moment in time. It's not going to last forever. This may
Hmm.
go a year or so. So yeah, that's the conversation I want to have. And then I'll also share with you. Last night I was at an event, and this just kind of captures the moment, and we'll get to the main topic today, and that's an agent to write a book because everybody has a book in them, and
Hmm.
it's not that you actually write the book; it's the fact that you're going to go through the process of well, you use the word the concept, right, of writing a
Hmm.
book,
Hmm.
and how
Hmm.
that's not just good for us as people to get clear on our messaging. It's good for the brand. It helps people understand who you are at this stage in your life, and so
Hmm.
on. So I was at an event last night, and it's I'm gonna get off topic for a second. I think you'll like this, but it's called Greenbuild, which is of course California. It was the inception, and it goes back, I don't know, 15, 20 years. It's Greenbuild, and now it's part of all building standards. It's the lead points and all this. So it was an event in downtown San Francisco that I was invited to. Nice place, beautiful place, and and the reason I'm laughing is because this happens all the time in the Bay Area, and again, I grew up here, right? So I'm used to this. So they're doing their announcements. Met some really great people, smart people, all involved in the building industry, and they start talking about their initiatives. And so they're going, well, we know we're really very proud of our diversity program or our equity program. I'm going, oh, that's cool, whatever. And then they started going over their schedule, and it's uh, women's group, women's group on this day, women's group. And I'm looking around, and like 2/3 of the room are women. I'm kind of laughing because I don't know if they just need to update their materials, but 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 why do you have a women's group when you're already all women? And then the other one they go into is diversity. Of course, there's not a single brother in the room, not a single nobody. There's no diversity. The only diversity was like yeah, there were some, gay guys or I don't know, maybe some different nationalities, but I don't know why I get a kick out of that because they take this stuff so serious about equality and all these initiatives and all these things that I'm going, how about if we just get back to building things and doing things other than trying to,
Well, it's in the context of it is funny because I think a lot of people aren't even aware of the
yeah,
things that they're saying or their surroundings a lot of the time. To your point, I
yeah,
mean, if the room's full of women, what do we have to specifically gather together women in other groups?
yeah.
It's like, well, because of something else, because no one's paying attention to something. But
Yeah, yeah.
you
Anyway,
know,
like I said, I gotta get off topic, but I want to go back to this conversation. This gal that I met, she wasn't even in the business. She was there with her boyfriend, and really interesting conversation. She's a grant writer, so she does professional grants and traveled the world. Very, very smart. And the conversation uh, went on and on about just the importance of human interaction, and how it's just it's who we are, and with AI and all things that are going on, it's even more desirable now. I think she was in Brazil, so she went to the carnival, and she was saying how fun it was and how active people were, even where people were kissing each other, and that's just part of the culture, right? That's what they do.
mhm.
And she was just reflecting how opposite that is become in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then the conversation went on, and she said, uh, "Wow, you should write a book." Uh, and that's what I want to talk about today because I know you mentioned that people have said that before. I've probably heard that at least 20 times, right? You should write
Yeah,
a book. And
yeah.
and uh and so yeah, that's what I think the topic should be today. Or let's just break that down what that means in relationship to an agent, and then also sharing our knowledge at this stage in our life. And so yeah, let's go with it.
Yeah, I think I've also had quite a few people tell me I should write a book, and I think there's a couple of ways to go with the whole book thing, but I'd like to back it up a little bit in terms of branding and agency. And it's just
Mhm.
like because of the recent experience that I had, two of them, one was this morning and the other one was a few days ago. The one a few days ago was rekindling a relationship with someone I know pretty well, rekindling a conversation or a stream of consciousness, because not a new guy, a guy I knew pretty well. This
Hmm.
morning was a guy who found me. I never talked to him before in my life. And in both circumstances, they either directly or indirectly made me aware very clearly that they would like my assistance in this form of agency, whether
Hmm.
it was branding, messaging, communication, professional development, leadership, whatever the issue was that they wanted to perpetuate their professional advancement, let's say, in
Hmm.
whatever capacity. They saw the benefit of dialoguing with a third party, me,
Hmm.
who by default was much more objective than they were because I was not them. I was not emotionally involved. I was objectively involved. And then
Hmm.
on top of that, my experience happens to be I've spent my entire life helping people advance professionally. So I happen to have an experiential curve that also suited their need. But this idea of speaking intelligently on behalf of someone else to get a third party to pay them, employ them, promote them, whatever it might be, it's very powerful. And as you said, as soon as we started talking about that in the pregame, one of the key components of that seems to be more so today than ever. You
Hmm.
should write a book. Mark, you should write a book. Jim, you should write a book. Well, the credibility of that and the authority of that goes well beyond what you said earlier, Jim, which is the cathartic experience of just getting your story out,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So there's the process or the concept of writing a book. There's another part of that that we're not going to talk about today, which is actually publishing the book. But
Hmm.
more importantly, now you have a book that you can say to somebody, well, in addition to what you and I just spoke about, in addition to the rest of our relationship, here's my book. This is, you can find out more about me. You can find out more about who I am, where I came
Hmm.
from, what's
Hmm.
important to me. You can not do that too, but now it's available to you because I wrote this book. And so
Hmm.
messaging is quite complex. It's very, very layered. There's a lot of components to it, but
Hmm.
the book, I probably the same, Jim, 20, 30 people. And, maybe 15 of those people, they wanted me to write a book because they wanted to help me write the book and get paid for it. But
Hmm.
the other 10 or 15 was like, I think it's just a good idea, you know?
Well, obviously, you were saying something of interest that they wanted to hear again or hear more about, and
Yep.
I think there's something, a couple things I was thinking about. You touched on when you work with multiple people in their. I'm just talking about career placement in your domain. Um, you have perspective of both ends, right? What the company's looking for, they don't. They may only do that. I don't know, maybe what 10 times in a lifetime. You do that 10 times in a week.
Mhm.
And the same what I'm learning now, like these other two opportunities that came up this week. These are companies that came to me and say, "Hey, will you spend some time with us?" Because the economy's changing, business is changing, and they want perspective. They want
Mhm.
there'll be some innovation because that's everything's innovation, right? You have to innovate your business every day in order to accommodate the changing marketplace.
Mhm.
And that, but I do think we underestimate that amount of knowledge that we've collected by having interactions with multiple people. Even as a sales, when I owned my sales agency, I think at one point I had like 200 dealerships, but I found over the years they were more interested in my knowledge of what their competitors were doing than my actual widget that I was selling at that time
Oh, of
was
course.
cabinet
Yeah.
manufacturers. And
Yeah.
uh, and
Yeah.
so
No,
they
it's
would
it.
buy my product just so they had access to me. Uh, and I didn't really even know it. I was just thinking I was doing my job, right? But that
Well,
and made
yeah, but you were the whole time you were operating in good faith, so it
yeah,
naturally
yeah,
kind
they
of
obviously
occurred.
trusted me and
Right.
they were getting
Right.
some value out of the products, but it wasn't as much as the manufacturers I was representing or the products I was selling is that they trusted that they would get valuable information if as long as we had a relationship and the
Oh
relationship
yeah.
was I
It's
was
it's it's so interesting that you bring that up because two things pop into my head. One of the things I used to profess to be able to do all the time, and I did, and I can still do that, is when you talk to hundreds of software engineers in a particular market
Mhm.
doing a particular thing over a period
Absolutely.
of
Yeah.
time, all of a sudden you have trend analysis, you have what's hot, what's not, what the salary
Hmm.
ranges are, who's hiring, who's, you have
Hmm.
all this market data that you've accumulated that's
That's right.
100% accurate. And
Yeah.
it's like people pay handsomely for that through
Yeah.
other places that specialize in gathering that data. And if you want to talk to me for 30 minutes, I'll give it all to you for free. And we
Yeah.
lose
Yeah.
sight of how valuable it is because
Yeah.
of what you said that I
Yeah.
refer to as the curse of knowledge. When you know
Yeah.
something very well, you particularly believe others know it just as well, and they
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. Well, you said two things that are worth kind of diving into. One is nothing is for free, right? You
Mhm.
didn't, it was for free. It was maybe undervalued, but it wasn't for free because you paid for it to develop that information.
Yep.
And the other thing that's becoming even more important than ever before, and that is IP, intellectual property. So you
Hmm.
have gathered information, data. That is your intellectual property. That's
Hmm.
not for free. And we used to give it away because we didn't. This is back to the role of an agent, right? I'm acting as your agent at the moment right now. Obviously, I understand IP because I'm an inventor, and I understand what it takes to bring uh, innovation and intellectual property to market that makes people a lot of money. We
Hmm.
It's not free, but and again, I'm jumping around a little bit because we have entered a place in time with this technology, particularly AI, of the power of it and what it can do, of how we can
Hmm.
capture our information. If we were to write a book, that used to take years to write. You have to hire an editor, a writer, a publisher. That was could take years to write a book, and then
Hmm.
actually get it printed. That's completely changed right now, and
Yeah.
um, and I think it's really cool actually. Same with like podcasting, right? That's to some degree we're capturing information and sharing it once a week. Um,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
these are back to technologies that I think have really leveled the playing field. And we talk about equality. This is the
Yep.
ultimate equality where
You
you
know,
don't have to go through a large corporation or a distribution channel to get your product and information out there.
yeah, the way that you quote unquote need to do things is no longer the way that you need to do things. But
Many of the barriers are lowered. Yeah, yeah,
I've been preaching that since the 80s because I was always a contrarian and interested in breaking rules, and I hate rules and not laws,
yeah.
rules, like rules that are just in place. And all the rules that you're talking about are all changing right before our eyes. They're disappearing, they're morphing, they're improving, disproving, whatever. But it's like, yeah, I think the other thing about agency that you just mentioned that I don't want it to slip by because you and I have talked about this a couple times is
Yeah, we have. Yeah.
what am I worth?
Hmm.
Well, if I would almost promise you, because of how well you know me now, among other things, and
Hmm.
trust me, that if I was to go, I'm gonna put us both in two separate rooms right next to one another. In one room, I'm gonna negotiate my price for me. And
Hmm.
in the other room, you're going to negotiate my price for me.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
would bet you $1,000 you're going to get way more for me than I am.
Yeah, I would agree. I agree. The other thing that this getting back to agent is the specialty, the domain, right? The knowledge of a specific domain. I do think it's not as general. Just because you do consulting in one area, doesn't mean your value is transferable to another domain. I do
Mm-hmm.
think you have to know your space. Some things are there's some principles that come across, but I think again, let's just go through the different types of agents there are. A real estate agent, a very emotional decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason why they don't allow you to have conversations directly with the other homeowner or
Mm-hmm.
with the selling homeowner, right? The buying homeowner. They're both agents talk to each other, and there's a reason why they do that because it's too emotional. It's such an
Mm-hmm.
emotional decision and a long-term
Mm-hmm.
decision.
Mm-hmm.
That's one example. The other one is, and I've shared this with you a couple times. When one of my very good friends was the manager. He was the Seattle Mariners manager at the time. I was this was Ichiro was playing. So was Ken Griffey Jr. So was that time period, right?
Timeline. Yep.
And I'd been up to the stadium several times to visit him. This particular game was against the New York Yankees. And so a lot of media and his, all in front of his office trying to get, because he has to do a talk before the game, and there's a lot going
Hmm.
on. Anytime the Yankees are in town, things you could just see everybody get super excited. So I'm in an office with him, and the press is outside because I had to get into his office. So I'm just sitting and we're talking, and his office, and the next to that is the press room. So we're just talking, and he goes, "Yeah," he goes, "See that guy right there?" Because he was this one of the pitchers was walking out of the office when I was walking in, and he goes, "That 40 million a year. He just signed a contract for $40 million a year to throw that ball over that diamond." And I remember thinking to myself, I didn't say it to him at the time. I remember thinking that guy would probably do that for free.
Yeah.
And most of them do. The minor leagues, right? What's the difference between a minor league player and him? The difference is he goes in, he can do that and win a baseball game. And then at that time, and Don's his name, he says to win in baseball, you have to be able to buy the pitchers that can win the closers. It's a money game, because if you don't have those guys, very few people can do what that guy can do. But it
Hmm.
wasn't, if he tried to negotiate his value, it certainly wouldn't have been $40 million. It was his
Yeah.
agent that put the value that he was worth $40 million a year, or not 40 million
Yeah.
a year, but that was his contract that he signed. So it was, yeah, it was just and I saw it when Jack was with the Oakland Raiders, and even is the same thing. These professional athletes, and as a head coach or a manager, how um, the agent was such a part of that relationship to get them
Yep.
in that spot.
Yep.
So that's just, and there's many other examples. But what other agents come to mind when you think about agents that you paid for and delivered a value? What other ones come to mind, Mark?
Well, I mean, my profession is the one that just keeps screaming at me. But I've had so many conversations with so many people about what they want to do and what they believe themselves to be good at or interested in and what they believe they're worth to be. And to your point, I think that, most of the people I deal with are, which is kind of interesting, are technology people, like the guy this morning, my new client this morning. And one of the things about technology people is they are generally, stereotypically, not always, but most of the time, not terribly socially animated. They're
Oh,
not the
of
best
course, interesting. Yeah,
communicators. They're
yeah,
introverts.
yeah,
They
yeah.
are they are
They're
calculated, they're mathematical, they're formulaic, they're
mhm.
details, they're
Yep.
data. They're not people. And
Hmm.
of course, that's not true of all of them for sure. But boy,
Right.
the ability to have someone like me who
Hmm.
has led his life communicating, like I love to
Hmm.
communicate. I'm extroverted for the most part. I
Hmm.
have no problem talking
Hmm.
about things that might embarrass a lot of people. You know
Yeah.
that quite well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so
Interesting though, but
I
you're
have
right.
this,
It's a certain type of individual that you've
they
learned
need
to
me.
develop
Yeah.
a relationship with. So and you're speaking on their behalf to some degree, right?
I am totally,
Yeah,
totally
yeah.
speaking on
You're,
their behalf. I'm also, when I send them on an interview, I'm putting my reputation in their hands. So I have
yeah,
a vested interest in protecting my reputation by preparing them properly and being forthright. And you might, what else pops into my head is, well, could I do the same thing for salespeople who are
hmm,
good communicators? Well, I don't know how many of them are good communicators. I know they like to talk. So I
hmm,
think there's probably a completely different way to help a sales rep. But I bet you
hmm,
most salespeople are like, I don't need an agent because I'm a
hmm,
good talker.
hmm.
Bullshit. That's the
Yeah,
reason. That's the reason you need an
you need
agent.
one more. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
how much authenticity a person has, it will also assist the agent or prevent the agent from helping. And
Hmm.
this goes back to, are you ready for help? You know,
Hmm.
so they're everywhere though. You can find them everywhere. We've both been agents on behalf of our children. We've probably been agents on behalf of our family members and friends in different circumstances. You step in. It's like, nah, let me speak on your
Yeah,
behalf
but
because you're too close
I'm
to
I'm
this.
glad you mentioned that, because I do think, let's face it, we're way too close to our children as far as
Yep.
being a good agent, or being objective in terms of whatever their value is. That's what, especially moms, right? Probably the worst, or
Mm-hmm.
worst best example. Going back to your point about working with engineers and in that space and their value, what's going on, that's back to specialty that
Hmm.
that you probably wouldn't get a guy like yourself in a big agency, right? You would get. I mean, that's the value of working with somebody like you that really understands the space because you're like me, you're not employable. So you
Hmm. Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
like we're not employable. I can't work for a company. I can own the company. They can borrow me for a few hours, but we're just at that stage where we're not employable. I call it, how do you say it? Employable?
Employable. Yeah, no. So I wasn't employable when I was employed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm still not. Yeah. So,
No, I think, the other thing that's kind of come from this talk of agencies, well, part of the job of the agent is the messaging, right? Part
yeah.
of the job of the agent is well, let's determine what your brand is. I mean, especially if you're talking about a celebrity or an athlete or a singer or what, I mean, their brand is like, I don't think most people would be able to even have a conversation with themselves about what their brand might be. I think the agent comes into that conversation and says, well, let's start the dialogue. Oh no, you're really good at this. You're much better at this than you think. Or maybe we shouldn't talk too much about that particular thing because that's one of your weaknesses. And you manage the messaging to turn it into a brand. And I think one of the things, as we said earlier, one of the reasons you got these gigs, these speaking gigs, is because of the messaging that you delivered to a previous speaking gig.
Yeah,
So
yeah, they're
it's
two
like,
separate things. There's the speaking part, kind of talking about what's going on in the industry and that part, but the two other opportunities just happened to come up this week because um, they're businesses that want to do some consulting. They've asked me to do consulting, and I don't have a sign out saying that I do. I'll do it occasionally for people I know or that I run into, but I can. This is very common, right? They're trying to figure out businesses slowing down. They're scared about tariffs. There there's less activity, and so they're looking for direction, and they want somebody that has a perspective of what's going on unique to the Northern California, San Francisco Bay Area market, right? So again,
mm-hmm,
it's about specializing into a specific domain, uh,
mm-hmm,
has a high value. And that's kind of why I'd probably have a bit of a chip on my shoulder when I keep saying consulting agencies or big companies. When how could they have that much knowledge, right? Just they hire a kid out of a Ivy League school and give them a couple forms and put them to work, right? I think those days are, well. Let's just say I'm speaking kind of out of out of term, but what I'm suggesting is for small businesses, real entrepreneurs are running businesses. That is bad advice. That advice has no value to them, especially if it's a large corporation that's giving recommendations for a market they don't know anything
well,
about.
what's interesting, Jim, is I did spend, as I said to you earlier off the record, was that I competed against the big consulting firms, and
Mm-hmm.
they walked into their prospects with a brand, a
Yep.
T-shirt, a name, a logo, a name,
Mm-hmm.
a reputation. And I walked in with my name.
Mm-hmm.
No one knew who I was. So
Mm-hmm.
I had to differentiate. But to your point, their motivation was not my motivation. I
Yep.
didn't answer to anybody, right? I
Mm-hmm.
answered to me.
Yep.
My next assignment, my next revenue stream was completely contingent upon my reputation, my results, and my integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're alluding to, I think, is that that's diluted when you go to a larger organization because
Mm-hmm.
the individual that might be giving you the agency or the advice is part of this big machine. So
Yep.
his or her motivation is layered. It's spread around. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just I'm going to operate in on behalf of your best interests. That's
Yep.
that's naive, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And we'll wrap up here because we're getting towards the end. The other thing that this came up is because that now that the election is over, there these so-called political consultant agencies are just taking it, taking a beating right now, as they should, because they called
Yeah,
it so wrong.
yeah.
And apparently they're not cheap. And that's is now the second time we're all talking about, obviously, the losses that they took, the Democratic parties. and that's a huge industry. Apparently, that's
Mm-hmm.
what they do in every political season. So if now they're 0-2 when it comes to uh, Clinton, Trump, and then now Harris, Trump. So it's really interesting to hear the excuses
Yeah.
and the criticism of these consultant agencies that told them to do this and do this and do that, and it obviously didn't work out.
Yeah, and it's always amazing to me, specifically in mine, but I'm sure in the government and the political side of things
Yeah.
too, is you don't really, it doesn't appear that you have to do a good job for someone else to hire you. You know, like what the fuck is going on with that?
I'm telling you, yeah. Well, because like you said, they're hiring resumes more than they're hiring the knowledge.
The people that hired, and I can use their name because it's a big public company. The people that hired Arthur Anderson or Ernst and Young or Price
Mhm,
Waterhouse or any of those client,
mhm,
McKinsey, Bain, Boston Consult, any of those big companies to come in and implement software, implement
mhm,
a new system, which is what I would compete against. They did other
mhm.
things, but that was a big part of their business. They used people that were recently graduated from school
I
with
know.
big
That's why I
degrees,
brought it up.
and they bring them in, and they it's like the mother duckling and the little baby ducklings behind them, and the dude in front or the woman in front, the consulting partner.
Yeah.
You see that person for one day, they buy you a really nice dinner and a couple of drinks, and you don't see them for 6 months. And these recent college graduates come in and they make money learning on your dime, and got
What a racket.
little old me comes in and says, I can give you one guy that can do the work of those six people.
Yeah.
And the first thing that they do is they're like, there's no fucking way you can do that. And I'm like, well, let's
Yeah.
have a dialogue about that, and I'll tell you a little
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah, the
competed
other one
against that
that
all the
there's
time.
talking, so that's a great story example of that. And there's the other ones, these advertising agencies, where they
Mm-hmm.
would go in and promise all of this media and ad, and then you find out later they were making money on selling the ads, and they had no way to quantify the results. Just another one of those industries that is just going to be completely destroyed because they're not credible. They don't have the data to prove that their cost justify the rewards or
You
the
can't. Well, you
outcomes. So,
can't. You can't. Some of this stuff you can't measure success, which is purposeful. If you can't measure it, then they can't get blamed for the lack of
exactly
it.
my point. But
Yeah.
we're with AI, where we can measure everything. You know, you
Yep.
can measure. There's just a totally different changing market. Again, I find it super exciting because those are opportunities for
Well,
people
I
like
want
us
to, I
that.
want
Yeah.
to, I want to throw one more point to that conversation out, which is in the reason that people do that, the reason that the people at the client company in positions of power, C-suite people, VP level, director level, whatever, people with their own budgets that don't have to
Mhm.
ask anyone else for money. The reason they hire the big guy with the brand and the logo and the T-shirt instead of little old me is because if the big guy fucks it up, they're not going to get fired. But if I
Mhm.
fuck it up, they're going to get fired. So you got to have balls to take a risk on
Yeah.
somebody like me. But you know what?
Yeah.
That's changing just because of what you just talked about.
I
It's the
believe it is. Yeah.
Yeah,
So anyway,
yeah.
good talk, Mark. Until next week.
Thanks, Jim.
All right.